And welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of Through the Hedgerow from Osprey Games. This is written by Jonathan Rowe with illustrations provided by Peter Johnston. This 272-page hardcover lands in stores on October 1st. It's going to carry an MSRP of $35. If you want, you can grab just the PDF alone for $24.50, also on October 1st. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Through the Hedgerow. A couple of things to mention before we jump on in. First of all, the fine folks over at Osprey Games were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, very important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside Through the Hedgerow. All right, so let's jump on in. I got to say, this is a pretty unique role-playing game. This is different. This isn't the same old that we see from various different role-playing game publishers. Now, having said that, this might be a little tricky for players and game masters to wrap their heads around, especially if they're pretty new role-playing games. First thing I want to talk about is actually the mechanics of Through the Hedgerow, because it does share a little bit of DNA with Savage Worlds Adventure Edition, because you're going to be using different sized dice to accomplish tasks, to either make checks or challenges. Talk about that in just a moment. So as far as your attributes, there are three main attributes, and then there's three minor attributes. The three main attributes are charm, might, and wit. And regardless of the archetype that your character is, you will have a choice of how you want to assign your dice to those attributes. So you get three six-sided dice. So if you want all three of those attributes just to be a D6, you can. D6 is you're moderately adept at charm, wit, might, so forth. You can bump one die up to a D8, but if you do that, you have to bring another one down to a D4. D4 is pretty inept. D8 is you're pretty solid. Now, it'll go up to a D12, which is pretty legendary. So it takes quite a bit to get to a D12. We also have Doom, because each of the player characters is destined for either a tragic or bittersweet end. We have Greymare, which is for magic. And then we also have Virtue, because there are abilities that the characters will have and earn that they'll roll that size die for if they're using that virtue. There's other dice as well that you can get for gear and armor and weapons, and the size die can increase, it can decrease. Sometimes you'll exhaust a die, so you can't use that die again until you end up taking a respite, which is kind of like a long rest. So there's a lot of moving parts going on in this game. So what'll happen with a test, it's pretty standard pass or fail. And it's something that only takes a moment or two to accomplish. Now, it doesn't mean it's something that's easy. It's just something that's fairly quick. So normally what will happen is a player will roll their attribute die. Once again, the charm, wit, might, and the game master is going to roll a peril die. The peril die is normally a D6, but the peril die can increase. There's also a nemesis die that is sometimes used. That's usually in a challenge. That's another die that gets rolled. So what's happening is, as opposed to, say, in like Savage Worlds Adventure Edition, where there's a target number that the player is looking to meet or exceed, here, the player is looking to roll equal to or higher to the die number the game master rolled. So they are not rolling against a target number. That number is going to change. So if the game master rolls poorly, well, then the player is in luck. If the game master is rolling really hot dice, then the player is going to be sort of screwed. So that is something to keep in mind because this is, at least in my opinion, more towards being a storytelling game than, say, a straight out traditional role playing game. And for some game masters out there, they don't like rolling dice against the players if they're in a storytelling game. You will always, as the game master, be rolling dice against the players. So keep that in mind. Challenges are a little bit different. So challenges have various different factors that are going to increase the difficulty of the task at hand. Now, challenges tend to be something that's going to take a bit more time or it's a bit more complex than simply a check would happen to be. So, like combat tends to be a challenge. Combat in Through the Hedgerow is not played through rounds. So, you're not going to be dinging people for hit points and things like that. So usually combat is a single challenge or only a few challenges that get rolled as opposed to something that's going to go on for 20, 30, 40 minutes or more. So I like that fact that the challenges kind of encompass just one or just a few die rolls as far as getting to the end of the combat. Now, something to keep in mind too is each of the player characters are going to have what's known as resolve. And resolve will have a lot to do with what their archetype is. And resolve is their morale, their hit points, their magic points, all kind of rolled up into one. So you can spend resolve, you can refresh your resolve. If your resolve goes to zero, you've been defeated for the adventure. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the character is dead. They maybe they've lost all hope and they need something to reinstill their purpose. All of these things are possible. Of course, it is also possible that the character got killed and their resolve was zero. So now they're no longer in the game. Now, of course, there is an archetype which is immortal. It's one of the mortals, strangely enough, right? It's the mortal who's immortal, not the Fay. And in a situation like that, their character wouldn't be killed, but they're going to be closer to their doom. Like I said, there are a lot of moving parts in the mechanics of Through the Hedgerow. Like I said, we've got dice that you get for armor, for gear. You have dice that you can roll to soak damage. So if you're in combat or maybe you're facing a hazard that would deduct from your resolve score, you can roll dice to soak that as far as how many points of resolve you actually lose. If you're a magic using archetype, then you're also looking at using resolve to power your spells. So I thought this was going to be a relatively rules light role playing game. It is not. But like I said, pretty interesting mechanics. I'll be very honest, even as an experienced game master, I'll tell you right now, it would take me a while of running Through the Hedgerow, probably 2 or 3 sessions before I finally had my head completely wrapped around everything going on with these various dice. So let's talk about the setting as well as the various different archetypes. So the premise of this is that your characters are members of the Briar Company. They're knights of the Briar Company doing battle against the forces of darkness. And you will have archetypes. Each one is very unique, very different from the others, and they actually complement each other rather well. So we do have Fay. So we have Fey characters who are headless trolls or animated scarecrows or bird-headed humanoids or humanoid spiders. And then as far as the mortals go, we have those aforementioned immortal champions. We have waifs, basically children, innocents. We've got hedge witches, we've got mummers, we've got warlocks. So we have got a lot of various different options out there. They all have different virtues, they all have different traits. So, a lot going on as far as the character creation and the abilities of the character as well. So, as far as the adventures go, there's actually a very specific construction to the adventures. In fact, the hedgerow itself is what the player characters will travel through if they're not of the age where the adventure is going to take place. I'll talk about ages in just a second. So they're going to see visions of different things, which is going to give them an idea of who are the enemies that they're going to be fighting against, what they need to accomplish. There will be certain things that the forces of light will ban the player characters from being able to do. So they have to make sure that they never do that during the adventure. Pretty wild, pretty cool. Now, there are 4 ages, which are detailed quite a lot in this book. We have the Dark Ages, the 9th century. We've also got the Age of Plagues, which is the 17th century. We've got the early Victorian age. And then we also have World War II. And the Knights of the Briar Company are looking to protect shires, rural areas where the dark is trying to complete their nefarious ends. And the player characters will actually be going up against 4 different factions of the dark. And they will normally only be taking on one faction in an adventure. But funny enough, the player characters also have to concern themselves with their opposites. So we have the opposites of the Briar Company, sort of along the lines of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, as opposed to the player characters Briar Company X-Men. So I thought that was kind of cool as well. There are other ages which are discussed in Through the Hedgerow. They just don't get a lot of detail. So it's not as if the time traveling is only set to those 4 ages. Something else that's kind of cool is as the characters travel through time, they tend to only be adventuring in certain shires. So they'll see the same location throughout these ages and the changes that have taken place and the various different story threads that run through the various different ages in these shires. I thought that was a very interesting wrinkle to the setting as well. So there's a lot to really like about Through the Hedgerow, although, once again, mechanically a little bit tricky. So I know maybe I sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but I think mechanically it could be in actual gameplay a little clunky, especially at first, learning how to run and play Through the Hedgerow. Now, there is an adventure that's contained in the book as well. And I got to say, it's a pretty good introductory adventure. We do have some adventure hooks to expand upon Through the Hedgerow also. Here's some of those other ages that are available. Now, most of the adventuring is probably going to be taking place in the English countryside, but there is mention of America and other countries too. So maybe that's something that we could see in a future supplement. I don't know. Here's the adventure, and the adventure actually takes up a decent amount of page space in here. So you should get quite a bit of gaming out of the adventure itself. Then, of course, we'll get some example characters. We have a pretty cool bestiary in here, which breaks down the 4 different factions. One of the factions is animals and corrupted animals and giant animals. We also have witches. We've got the undead. So nice variety to those as well. And then we're just going to wrap up with some appendices with the character sheet and an example of play. So there you go. That is a look inside Through the Hedgerow from Osprey Games. let's swing on over to the other camera. I'm going to share some final thoughts and give this a review score. As I mentioned, there's a lot to really like about Through the Hedgerow. Mainly, it's very unique. It's very different. It's not like any other role playing setting that I've ever encountered in the past. And I like that a lot. I think the archetypes are very unique, very interesting. I think they would be loads of fun to play. I like the fact that, the light isn't necessarily good and the dark isn't necessarily evil, but they are opposed. I also love the fact that the player character could have formerly been a follower of the dark who's now recruited to fight for the light, reluctantly, possibly too. So I like that. There's a lot packed inside Through the Hedgerow, but I do have a couple of quibbles. As I've mentioned, mechanically, I don't know. This feels like it might be a little clunky in execution. Now, granted, after repeated play, everybody's going to get a grasp of everything. But to start off with all the various different dice and how the dice can change, and sometimes you get to keep dice all the time, and some dice you exhaust, and then you have different rest, and then you have respites, which are different than rests. This is pretty crunchy. It really, really is. And that might be a turnoff for some folks. I don't know. Once again, I do find the mechanics to be unique, something we haven't seen before. Although, as I mentioned, I think it shares a little bit of DNA with Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. Something I mentioned with just about every Osprey Games role playing game is we never know how much support the game is going to get. Now, thankfully, with Through the Hedgerow, there's a lot packed into this book. So you may not necessarily need a lot of supplemental material. But I got to say, with as interesting as this setting is, I would love to see that. Now, I should also point out that I have heard that there are some other supplements that are in the works. I've heard that in the past of other Osprey Games role playing games, and those supplements never saw the light of day. So I don't know. I don't know what kind of future support we will see for Through the Hedgerow. And I have to point that out because I know a lot of folks out there, they enjoy home brewing stuff. And then there are a lot of folks who like to have published material to use for the role playing games. So keep that in mind. All in all, I certainly do recommend Through the Hedgerow. I like it. I think it's unique. I would enjoy playing it. I'll tell you that much. Might be a little tricky to run it, but I would certainly enjoy playing it. So, on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Through the Hedgerow from Osprey Games an 8 out of 10. I like it. I can recommend it. Might not be for everyone, but you might want to give it a peek. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos here on the channel, be sure to visit gaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you will not find on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.